We've just finished a deep dive on Vision Forum, which has taken us over to the hyper-patriarchal, dominionist corners of the library. So we're going to stay there for a bit and examine the parenting teachings coming out of Doug Wilson and Moscow, Idaho. First, refer you to any of these books, which have done an excellent job examining the subcultures that contribute to Reconstructionism, dominionism, the adjacent theologies, and how that plays out in both marriages and family life. So these will give you an exhaustive understanding of some of the additional dynamics going on. I also recommend you check out any of the Examining Doug Wilson and Moscow, Idaho social media pages. Their Facebook profile in particular has an exhaustive, scrupulously resourced timeline of how this community developed. Also includes documentation about the many allegations against Doug Wilson for misconduct, for supporting sexual predators, for abuse of power. You can see some of them listed here. So it's definitely, if you want to research this movement more, those are great places to begin. I want to do a very brief overview here to give you enough context in case you don't want to dive into all the weeds. But it's important to note at the outset, so many of these subcultures overlap. Even if they have distinct theologies in some respects, they have a shared overlap with family life teaching. For instance, IBLP's theological principles would probably be more in line or attractive to people coming from a Baptist tradition, whereas Doug Wilson is heavily Calvinist. So those theological starting places are pretty distinct. And so if you say, oh, these are the same circles, theologians might be like, wow, these are very diverse. But the application in family life teaching is going to overlap. So you're going to see these people maybe sharing platforms at conferences, at homeschool conventions, at family life teaching kind of resource hubs that may not align with all their theological principles, but when it suits, it's going to overlap. And all three of these authors discuss this idea when it comes to responses to the culture war, when it comes to family life teaching, when it comes to specific areas, they are going to be allies when it suits them. Also gives them the ability to distance when it doesn't. So for instance, when Vision Forum implodes, Doug Wilson can kind of come out and distance and say, well, that's what happened there isn't a result of patriarchy, it's a result of Doug Phillips particularly. And while absolutely Doug Phillips has responsibility for his actions, it leaves kind of the family life teaching still uncritically examined because that distance, that buffer has happened, that minimization of the ways the ideology cultivated abuse in various ways and enabled it. The people who still want to hold to those teachings can distance. And wow, there's a lot of connections. So Doug Wilson and Doug Phillips, the Dougs, met in 2010 at a Midwest homeschooling convention in Cincinnati. And they kind of had a loose collegial relationship that a lot of these guys did, where they would maybe sell each other's resources. A lot of their audiences would have been consuming those same resources. So you maybe would go into a home and you would see Wilson's family life teaching right up there alongside Doug Phillips, right up against maybe Mary Pride or some of the stuff from Above Rubies, and even Gothard's stuff. Though his was so all-encompassing for so long, many Gothard families would have only been Gothard all the way. And you see that happening in Doug Wilson's community now. Many are going to be only Doug Wilson all the way. And this happens as the groups become more insular and more focused around a specific leader than even what, I hesitate to say diversity because these teachings aren't diverse, but even what difference there may have been where they might have been listening to different leaders really minimizes. And you see that with Vision Forum as well. At a certain point, everyone's just only Vision Forum resources all the time. Only Doug Wilson, only Bill Gothard. But for many families who maybe aren't all in on the subcultures, they're pulling from all these different voices, which were communicating similar things. And also credibility comes from endorsement in the broader community. So maybe people who aren't actually in Doug Wilson's close community, but are in a similar or adjacent theological realm, would recommend his resources, begin to see him as a colleague, and publicly indicate that. So here's a few names here that you may recognize. John Piper's probably the most well-known on the list. He has shared a platform with Wilson. Some of Wilson's resources are still available for sale in Piper's bookstore, Desiring God bookstore. Joe Rigney recently resigned from Bethlehem Baptist and is now teaching at New St. Andrews, the undergraduate program Wilson started. Here's some other leaders and teachers who end up lending credibility to Wilson and Canon Press. Also, I'm thinking of Mark Driscoll when he was still at Mars Hill. He was often invited to speak at conferences in Moscow. And so it wasn't even limited to the ones today who are supporting Wilson, but people were introduced in years past via other leaders. And these sort of interconnected shared credibility, spiritual pyramid schemes means that accountability is really hamstrung. So obviously within a dominionist model, there's no accountability in the system when you kind of have untouchable leaders at the top. Whatever they say goes. So if a survivor comes forward and names abuse or failure to respond properly to abuse, if there's harmful teaching, no one within the system really has authority to bring accountability. It's a top-down structure. But even the people maybe in the broader Christian community that might bring external pressure or call for accountability are hamstrung because there's a difficulty to maintain integrity when it can be so costly to speak out against your former allies. And in fact, in this particular community, it is very costly. When someone does speak out, they're often attacked or invited to come speak one-on-one, and there's a lot of pressure to not call out the harm. Okay, in part 2, we are going to look at the chronological development of this community.